Newfoundland and Labrador is home to many legendary mineral discoveries, from the historic Voisey's Bay to the modern gold rush along the central Newfoundland gold belt. There's even a new mine, Equinox Gold's Valentine Mine, which started up last year. Enter Pirate Gold. The company is led by CEO Denis Laviolette, a mining leader known for his foundational role at Newfoundland Gold's massive Queensway discovery and for pioneering AI exploration tech through Earth Labs. Denis, welcome to Mining Stock Daily.
Thanks, Mike. My pleasure to be here.
Denis, let's talk about your flagship, the Moosehead Gold Project. You note that there's 130,000 meters of drilling to date on the project. What's a geological picture look like now versus when you started, Denis?
Well, obviously that is the geological picture, I guess. When I started, I just started. It feels like so back in October. So a lot of that drilling is sort of like what we stepped into, and that's a lot of big reason why I started. What's interesting is when you sort of come into something, especially myself and Greg Matheson, we're both geologists, and one of the things you want to do is kind of go back through and reevaluate all the interpretations. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes, you see things in data that maybe other people missed or whatever. So it's a helpful exercise. And maybe you land in the same place, the same interpretation and the same ideas. But maybe you find new things. And so where we're at now is that a lot of that digesting has been done. So we've now really gotten a chance to come up to full speed on everything, get our hooks into all the data, play with everything, and formulate our own models of where we're at. And so there's some really interesting things that came out of that work. One of the main things I think that was, in some ways no surprise, but one of the main things that was interesting there was the recognition that all of that drilling that you talked about, and it's a lot of drilling, there's over 600 holes, and it sort of pin cushions this, Denis the Menace slingshot shaped set of veins along the Valentine Lake fault corridor. Now, the reason that's, what's sort of surprising about it, I guess, is that there's structural replicates along that Valentine Lake fault corridor that shares the similar signature and fingerprints to what we're seeing on that, with all of the historic drilling at Moosehead specifically. So we believe the system's a much bigger, more prolific one. And so we're really looking for low-hanging fruit in and around the vicinity. So that image has gotten a lot clearer for us. And we've even had the chance to test and find some new things.
Now, Denis, you've had some nice return grades out of Moosehead, but some of those intervals have been quite narrow. Talk a little bit about that and how you could see that modeling out in terms of something that gets to production.
Well, the nice thing is the continuity on the narrow veins is really, really uncanny. How planar these features are, and how big these strikes and widths, and how predictable that is. So it's really a very simple model that hangs together nicely when you look at that stuff. And in fairness, it's really not that narrow. I mean, if you talk about at those grades, a half a meter or a meter, it's narrow for sure, but it's not unlike other orogenic mines that are tremendous around the world and throughout the Abitibi. I mean, that's kind of the general run of mill sort of ore width that you'd get at other sites. And so, whether you were in Red Lake or Kirkland Lake or Timmins or Rouyn-Noranda or Val-d'Or, I mean, that's sort of what those mines are. There's over 200 million ounces of gold has been mined in those fashions of things. But what's also kind of interesting here is that those, sort of tentacles usually come off of more juicy, widespread blowouts of quartz. And that's what we had the luxury of banging into over at Newfound Gold, was that, you follow the, as we call it, the spider webs until you got to sort of, or at least I called it that. You'd follow this sort of network, multi-kilometer network of webbing. And then every now and then you'd get these unbelievable and very remarkable, juicy, large, wide zones with great extents to them and great continuity to them. Like if we're talking about Newfound Gold, the Keats zone and the Iceberg and Keats West. And these are sort of like the larger, more prolific blowouts along the way. And so one of the, I think, important identification features that we've made, I guess, or at least takeaways that we've got from analyzing Moosehead is that we're seeing a ton of webbing. And there is some, wider intervals or some juicier stuff, but we're still chasing that webbing until we hit these bigger blowouts. And it's really a blend of all that makes for an economic situation. You could hypothetically, and again, forward looking and disclaimer, hypothetically, you could mine, narrow veins at sort of a decent margin, let's say, especially like $5,000 gold, mining 30 gram, 50 centimeter or 30 centimeter veins is it's not the end of the world here. It's pretty good rock. But if you wanted to, really get after it and make a bigger case for everything, I think it's important to find either a lot more of that or more, hopefully more of these bigger kind of blowout zones that help tie it all together and create, big sort of higher tonnage kind of targets, let's say. And so for us, it's really about feeling this all out. Incorporating all that work, taking as much as we can out of that, and then chasing a lot of these structures. Because, if you're looking for these blowouts, the best way to do it is to get into the structures that are juiced up and then follow the gold.
Let's talk about Crippleback. I believe that is the other project that you're leading with, Denis. As you're marching south, and then you're kind of getting close to the Valentine Gold Mine as you get there. On your site, you do say that it is one of the most significant growth opportunities. You say that there's analogs to the Valentine Gold Mine. What are the analogs?
Identical rocks, identical age. So there's a suite of rocks in there, igneous rocks, largely dominated by this, quartz monzonite, and they're actually basement rocks from Avalonia. And so, not to get too sciencey for your audience, but if essentially Newfoundland is a continental collision margin between the African plate and the North American plate. And so you've got this massive continents crashed together and one subducted underneath the other one and gave you this orogenic belt, these big cracks in the earth in accreted terrains that span the entirety of the island and across through all of Appalachia, in fact, down to northern Alabama, all the way to Scotland. And so it's an incredibly massive belt, and there is different analogs to this along the way. So Valentine Lake is not a one-off thing. There's other deposits that share these fingerprints in these types of rocks. But what's interesting is somehow in the middle of this, crash site of accreted terrains, you've got this raft or this section of Avalonia, of the African plate, that's sticking up in the sandwich. And that's literally what Valentine Lake, it's the same suite of rocks. And so we've got it here also. So they're the same age, et cetera, et cetera. And they're both situated along the Valentine Lake fault shear zone. And that's the kind of big artery. That's the big plumbing system in the region. And so you've got this super important plumbing system that all the mineralization seems to be adjacent to and connected with, but you have this suite of rocks that's just a different chemistry. It reacts differently with those gold-bearing fluids. And so it became a great sponge rock for Valentine Lake, and that's what's hosting the deposit. And so for us, we have all the exact same conditions and the same chance to find something. But one of the things that differentiates it is that you also have this overprint, or we actually don't know what it is. I'll call it an overprint for now. But we have this other indicator of copper and molybdenum and zinc and silver. So where's all that metal coming from? And why is it everywhere on top of this, Crippleback intrusion? And Valentine Lake doesn't have that. So that's something that's kind of telling us that there might be even a different model at play, maybe with epithermal fingerprints over at Moosehead.
Well, talking about the different rock, I think that you did mention porphyry within the project as well, too, which would be a little anomalous in Newfoundland, if I'm correct, Denis?
Yeah, well, certainly the high sulfidation epithermal would not be. I mean, if you look at say Hope Brook Okay, so Hope Brook is another piece of Avalonia. It's another type. It's in within the same suite of rocks, right, on the south shore of the island. And Hope Brook is a high sulfidation, perfectly preserved high sulfidation deposit. And in fact, it's the largest gold producing deposit on the island to date. So it's an interesting analog. But throughout, as far as porphyries go, there are other porphyries in Appalachia that matter. In fact, one of the great ones is Gaspé in Quebec, which Osisko is pressing forward with. And Gaspé, I mean, again, it's the same geological conditions, very similar rocks, similar ages, et cetera, et cetera. So, and an epithermal, for the listener, an epithermal deposit would be like the fluids that come out of a porphyry. So let's imagine the porphyry is really down deep somewhere and you don't know where, but you've got this fluid system that comes off of it and forms an epithermal deposit. So they're sort of interchangeable and connected. So the questions that lie right now unanswered are, do we have an epithermal deposit here? Do we have a porphyry somewhere around? If so, where is it? Is it turned over sideways and somewhere on strike, some distance away from where we're finding mineralization? Or is it down deeper and we'll never find it? But there's this tremendous, high sulfidation potential above it. And so for us, we're sort of like, diagnostically working through the evidence. And for now, what's really exciting is we're drilling these 2 mega holes that get across kind of like the big picture here. And those holes are going to tell us a ton. Hopefully they bump into something. That's that'd be the dream, right? But at very least, they're going to tell us where we are in the system and what exactly we're looking for.
Now, Denis, I believe that you announced a 50,000 meter drill program that was in September 2025, and that wound up last month in February 2026. You have a market cap roughly at 78 million right now. How are you funding that right now? Is that through current cash, and is there a chance you might have to go back to the markets?
No, we're pretty cashed up. I won't quote this exact number, but I'd say we're in the low 20s in terms of millions of dollars in the till. We closed a $24.5 million financing, and then we got a bunch of exercised warrants and things. So a few million bucks came on top of that. But as you said, we're drilling 50,000 meters. We've got 3 rigs turning now, soon to be 4, hopefully. And we're spending the money. Like we want to drill, and we want to create news and all that kind of stuff. So we're going at this full steam. So we're in that kind of low $20 million range right now, probably at a pace of burning around a couple million a month. It'd be my thumb suck on things. Again, we're ramping things, we're dialing everything in. So numbers can change from month to month, and it takes a bit before you kind of have it all dialed in and you know exactly what your run rate is. So we're good for now. We've, barely touched that 50,000 meters. We're probably somewhere around, 8,000 meters into that. And so we've got a long ways to go. And of that 8,000 meters, I think we've only press released results from the first 8 holes, which represents like, a stipend of that. So, I mean, there's, one could imagine there's a lot more on deck to be released, and that, we're waiting on assays for. And then on top of that, we've got a hell of a pace that we're running into some new and exciting things.
Are you year-round in Newfoundland, or is it winter drilling up there?
Yeah, you're absolutely year-round in Newfoundland. Some areas, depending on where you are, can be a little spongy in like the thaw, or better to get at and do in the winter, in fact, than the summer, and vice versa. There's some areas that are better to deal with in the summer than the winter. So yeah, overall the project is year-round for sure, but there's always nuances to that. How's
it like getting assay results?
I think it's kind of a ubiquitous across the board right now in the industry. I think we're, a lot of us are dammed up at ALS Chemex. It's been about like sort of like a 6 to 8 week turnaround. I mean, they claim it should be like 4 to 6, but my general expectation here and what I've been seeing has been 6 to 8 weeks on things, which is a little bit lengthy for me.
Community support, are the Indigenous groups you consult with?
Well, one of the interesting things of Newfoundland, as opposed to other Canadian jurisdictions, is there is no indigenous groups.
Okay.
Effectively, they exist in Labrador, but not in the island proper of Newfoundland. So that's a stakeholder that sort of doesn't exist, at least in a formal way, in the island. But anyway, our relations with all peoples and all stakeholders in the region have always been sterling. I mean, I think we carried that through from Newfound Gold. This is Newfound Gold. Our home base was Gander, and we're about 40 kilometers from Gander right now in Grand Falls, Windsor. So it's kind of like the tale of two cities. They're these tiny little towns, but they're very much interconnected. The peoples, etc. So people know who we are in Gander. We're in Grand Falls. They welcomed us with open arms, and everybody is over the moon about us being there and getting the work done. So, Newfoundland is just so amazing that way. Like, it's very, very pro industry, pro mining, pro work. Like, they like it. They're, everybody's out there to help you. And, with all of that discovery explosion that happened with Newfound Gold and all the capital that flowed in, a lot of small businesses and commerce grew. Hotels expanded because there was drillers everywhere, and there was geologists everywhere, and restaurants and catering companies and everything, and the hotel businesses. And so, I mean, this is the fabric of society. This is what makes your neighbors and people are generally happy in place. And so when you can deliver, commerce directly to communities just like that, there's no choice but for them to be, somewhat happy. So yeah, I mean, this is ubiquitous from Newfound Gold to this company. There's no pushback from community at all.
These are some stepping back questions, Denis. Look, this metals have had an incredible run right now. You've been at this for a while. We have a bit of a window right now, though, of course, because commodities go up, commodities go down. What do you prioritize right now in this current environment?
You mean as an investor?
I mean, in terms of getting work out, do you feel an urgency right now, just be given what we have with gold prices, or is there something that you do more about permitting, for example, as well, too, because we're in a pro-development things? Is there things that you do strategically differently that you're looking at right now, just getting that, we were recently at $5,000 gold.
Well, look, it makes you think. One of the advantages is our proximity to, obviously, to Queensway, which is moving towards development, and Hammerdown. So those are very close neighbors to us that are literally initiating what will be a tons of rock, flying back and forth every day on that highway that crosses right past Moosehead. So it makes a ton of sense if you do have a high grade situation of value over at Moosehead to try to work that forward through the permitting process and get it into play within this cycle. I think that's an important, maybe something to pay attention to, but it's not a priority. I don't want to let that drive the priority, because it can cheapen things. I mean, let's stand back a bit. We're at let's call it $5,000 gold, and I know it's off of that right now, but let's say it's been floating around that for a bit. So let's say we're in that $5,000 gold environment, which is super exciting to a lot of people. But if you want to equate this back to like 08, is this the correction we had from 900 down to 500 and then back to 2000 in 08? Like, is this little correction we're having, and we're having it now back to 4,500, and then, the rest is history. And we don't know what a lot of the driving forces are here. But the reality is, from my perspective and the world through my lens, is this. I came into an island that I think the market had disregarded. I think capital markets in Toronto and Bay Street and Howe Street had forgotten about, and they wrote off for dead. They didn't really know it was a thing. They didn't realize the history of this place and how fresh and new and how much there was to be explored. And so either I'm the smartest guy in the world, Mike, that went and staked a district scale play along a big ass crack that I could see from regional geophysics that everyone has access to. And I went and staked it all and found a multi-million ounce gold deposit that's worth billions of dollars, and I'm a genius for doing it, or I got lucky on a macro theme, which was this island is underexplored and there's so much more to explore. And that is, maybe this is telling too much, but I think that we're just getting started as explorers in Newfoundland. I think Newfound Gold and Queensway between Greg and I was our first thing. And now we've put together a comparable massive land package on a parallel structure. And there's no reason for us to believe that we don't have just as good a shot of having lightning strike twice again for us. And, I sort of ask myself this all the time. Would I bet against that, against showing? So what I really want to show here is that we've got a district. There's a district of gold. And districts of gold are worth more than any one little piddly deposit or, even a big deposit. If you have an entire district, it's a totally different picture. And so one of the competing themes here is that if you start to lean in too heavy in the small deposit that you're starting with and start to talk resources and start to wrap PEAs around it and so on and so forth to get it into play, you end up boxing yourself out of the exploration, the speculation, and the excitement about getting, unlocking this district and finding more gold. Now, I know for a lot of listeners, they may be listening to me cringing or gritting their teeth or saying, but Denny, you're missing it. You got to get that in there because the market's now and people are going to pay. I get it, guys. I game this thing all the time in my head. Like I play out the scenarios all the time. And I'm pretty confident that when the time is right, let's say this cycle advances and it advances in a positive direction, it'll be just as exciting to move things through the permitting process then. And also I look at the permitting process itself. Look at all the headwinds against regulation in the mining space right now under the current political apparatus on both sides of the aisle. The Liberals want to cut the timelines and cut the permitting process, and so do the Conservatives. And so, do you want to go in with the old school slow way with everybody, chewing through it and it costs you a fortune? Or maybe in a year, maybe the permitting speed gets accelerated by 500%. Maybe it's 1,000% because Donald Trump's bending us over a barrel, literally. And so I think that, right now, what do I have? I have an exciting discovery story. I'm getting paid to discover and find new things. I'm going to continue to do that. That's the focus.
Denny, I have to, a bit of a tangent, but I have to ask you about AI and automation because it's on your resume, and then it's something that just keeps coming up all the time. That's a trend that just always gathers momentum. Help us out, though. What's meaningful? What's real? You're in the work right now that you're doing exploration. You're getting drill results. You're with a company that's doing exploration. Talk about what you're seeing that is really meaningful that is happening regarding these trends within the type of work that you do.
I think right now I'm seeing a lot of signal on data collection and the instrumentation to collect data, particularly in multispectral core scanning, that type of technology. This matters because the riskiest part of the mining industry, the riskiest segment of the sector, let's say, is the exploration one. And so it's great to be seeing innovation that helps to de-risk that and improve the odds. I mean, if you can collect more interesting data and get more visibility out of this stuff, it's incredible stuff. And so much better than just a geologist logging core with this spectrum of colors that a human being can see, and nothing more than that. So having all this fancy stuff, being able to collect all this extra information is a real benefit to the space, and I think it's really encouraging. And I don't think we're really we haven't seen the adoption rate of all that really take effect and how it's going to improve things. I think remote sensing is super, super exciting. That's probably where most improvement is needed and most access is needed for technology. AI in particular, I think the tools that are available today and the insights that are available with those tools today are perfectly fine. I don't think they're going to get remarkably better. I think right now it's about improving the data collection. And whether it be, remote sensing data or, geochemical data, various instrumentation that can be done, drones, shrinking things down. Mike, they're going to, I hope this happens, or if it hasn't happened already, they're going to be removing this rule for line of sight on geophysical data collection, which allows drones to cover massive, massive areas. Now, the shockwave this will send through the industry to shorten up and tighten up the costs around collecting geophysics data is going to be huge, because right now you still have to fly either low resolution fixed wing or higher resolution heliborne, but it's super expensive. And then with drones are great, they're cheaper, they're higher resolution, etc. But you're limited on how much ground you can cover with a survey, because the drones are limited on flying beyond line of sight for the operators. And so soon they're going to be able to go like in other jurisdictions where you can set these things up and they're just going to mow grass and collect your data. And that's a really big help for it. So I see this big data boom happening before I see AI taking it from there, digesting all this data and giving us real impact. On the operating side or sorting technologies, again, it's in this sensor stuff. It's going to be a big deal. And that's another place where I can see AI actually having a big impact, is in the mineral processing side. So I think technology, if the question is broader technology, what's most important on the horizon, I think those are the ones to watch.
Finally, let's bring it back to milestones and news flow with the projects that you have with Crippleback and your other projects. What's going to be the news flow, Denis? You were talking about that you have the drill results out, but you're just looking in terms of when you're going to be getting those back from the labs.
Yeah, so milestones up ahead. I mean, it'll be continuous flow of drill results. I think, we are a bona fide explorer. We're not going at this slow. We're not dawdling around with one rig. We have serious money and we're going at it hard. We have incredible real estate that we're testing, whether it be Crippleback or Moosehead. We've had some early success already. The first 9 holes in Crippleback that Tim drilled last year before we came in, he hit mineralization in every one of those things. And to be fair, the mineralization that he hit all inside of the intrusion, every one of those holes had, like, every sample had some copper, some gold, some zinc, some through, like, literally every sample, like above detection limit and anomalous values of all of those metals and all of the rock. And so what the hell is that? And why is it so big? Why is it so widespread? Well, we're drilling it now. We're drilling these massive holes in that, and it's going to tell us so much. Maybe we bang into something. So I think those are really exciting catalysts. I think, discovery catalysts are what we're really looking forward to here with this company as we move forward into this year and possibly next.
Denis, thanks for speaking with Mining Stock Daily.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
The information presented should not be considered investment advice. Mining Stock Daily and its affiliates are not responsible for any loss arising from any investment decision in connection with the material presented herein. Please do your own research or speak with a licensed financial representative before making any investment decisions.